and welcome to this penultimate, or perhaps for some of you, last session of the day. So we've got an expert panel assembled from across Europe. So the 6 gents comprise expertise in pharma, CDMO, modelling, equipment, academia and regulatory. So hopefully we're in for a very lively debate today. We're going to try and be somewhat controversial in terms of the statements. You should be here to hear about digitally enabled technologies for continuous manufacturing and regulatory needs. So just to get a feeling for the audience, hands up if you've got a reasonable awareness of continuous manufacturing. So maybe about half, yeah. And hands up if you've got a reasonable awareness of digitization or digital aspect. A bit less. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be informed, in this area. So, start with myself. My name's Craig Johnston. So I work at the University of Strathclyde for CMAC, Continuous Manufacturing Advanced Crystallization. So we're a network of 7 universities and 8 large pharma companies. So we work in manufacturing research, concepts of digital twin and microfactory. So that's our background. We also offer some contract services. We've got a slide for each of the team here, so I'll just let them introduce themselves and also to make an initial statement in terms of the topic.
So my name is John Paul Sherlock, and I work with AstraZeneca. I've been with AstraZeneca for about 20 years. I currently lead the development and maintenance of a manufacturing technology strategy for our manufacturing and supply network. So that involves defining how best to respond to the trends that we see across the business, across the portfolio, and building a reflection on the current technologies are, with a view to then developing a portfolio of technology programs that we can manage in a similar way to the way that we manage drug projects with that same level of professionalism. And I think that's in response to the fact that I think AstraZeneca over the last certainly over the last 5 years has really been on a quite significant journey. We had a number of very large products all coming off patent at a very similar time, and I think the CEO at that particular moment said, if you think this year's bad, wait till you see next year. Not quite the leadership that we were after at that point. So we did have a leadership change, and since that point it's all been about return to growth. And the journey to that return to growth, which basically announced on our last quarter results, has been by bringing in a much wider variety of medicines and projects. So we're seeing significant increases in complexity, significant increases in variety, and also numbers and the pace at which we develop. And when you look at that, you basically say our current and existing technologies aren't fit for purpose. So the response from the technology perspective is really to say we need to do something different, and therefore my provocative comment is that a cornerstone to our future delivery, our future portfolio is absolutely critical, is continuous manufacturing.
Thanks, JP. Over to Brian.
Thanks, John. Great. So Brian Glennon, I'm currently Professor of Biochemical and Chemical Engineering in University College Dublin, where I've been for the last 25 years. And most of that time I've worked on pharmaceutical process engineering and various aspects of that. For the last 10 years I've been a principal investigator in the SSPC, Academic Industrial Collaboration Centre in Ireland. In parallel to that, in 2011, I was one of the founders of APC, and APC is a process development company, so working with the pharmaceutical industry to develop better processes. And in APC we're entirely molecular weight agnostic, so we work in small and large molecule. We're therapeutic area agnostic, so again we work on everything from oncology, small molecules, to vaccines, to cell and gene therapy. And we're also technology agnostic, so we do a lot of work on both batch and continuous processing. So based on all of those kind of experiences, maybe 2 opening statements that I would make is that what we've seen is that in small molecule for the last 10 years there's been an increasing interest in continuous manufacturing. I think part of the challenge has been it's not entirely clear which of the many challenges continuous manufacturing is solving. Sometimes it's flexibility, sometimes it's quality, sometimes it's speed to market, sometimes it's manufacturing flexibility, manufacturing mobility. And so that is still, I think, an ongoing challenge of trying to understand what's the particular problem to which continuous manufacturing is a solution. In biologics, I think it's much more simple. The problem statement is very straightforward. There's just not enough capacity. So the challenge is to have greater capacity or greater manufacturing capability in an existing footprint. So there the challenge is very simple to understand, that maybe process intensification, and clearly continuous manufacturing has a clear and defined role in there. So I think for us the ongoing challenge is trying to understand where end-to-end, and in particular end-to-end continuous manufacturing fits in the small molecule pharmaceutical industry.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes, Sean Birmingham. I head up the life sciences team at PSE, Process Systems Enterprise. And we're a company who develop tools that allow people to build digital twins of their drug products and their manufacturing processes. Again, these tools get applied both in batch and continuous, but the interesting thing about continuous is that the business case for using digital twins is often clearer. And what this slide shows is there's actually a row missing. So at the top, on column 2, it says one factor at a time, type experimental program, and then the third column, QBD 1.0, which is the more traditional QBD based on doing combinatorial DOEs and developing statistical models. And what I've written on the right-hand side is another way of doing QBD, where we're using these mechanistic models to develop digital twins. We calibrate them against experimental data, which is typically a lot less than you would need to build a statistical model, especially when the number of factors is very high. So the thing that makes continuous processing an interesting area for applying this kind of digital technologies is that if you have 7-8 process parameters, you're not going to do a full DOE. That's going to take a very, very long time. So you have two options. One is to hope that you guess which 3 are the critical process parameters, and you do the DOE looking at the right parameters. Or you actually use mechanistic models, use a few experiments to calibrate the model, and then do a virtual DOE where you look at maybe a million different combinations of formulation parameters, process parameters, and so on, and then understand which ones are truly critical. And then, of course, you can still decide to do an experimental DOE around those top three parameters. So I think if you want to design continuous processes efficiently, so not doing very, very large physical DOEs, and if you want to really understand whether they're robust and the control strategies work, you really need to go down this digital twin route. And actually, a number of companies have already done this. Eli Lilly have filed a product, goes to CDC. They use modeling to verify their control strategies and prove that it works. The FDA use the same technology to do their analysis of someone's control strategy. So this is, not everyone's doing it, but there are some people doing it. And I think in continuous in particular, I think the business case between a physical DOE and using a digital twin for a virtual DOE is very strong. A bit of more background. So we have collaborations with RCPE on the development of digital twins, in particular in the drug product area. And Johannes will talk about the activities there. But we've also been involved in the Remedies project here in the UK, which has funded quite a lot of the developments that went into this digital twin capability. There's another UK project called Adopt, where also a lot of developments have happened.
Thanks, Sean. On to you, Phil.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Philip Gabb. I'm the Group Sales Director for GEA. GEA is one of the leading process equipment suppliers in the world, servicing food, pharma, chemical, nuclear, a whole range of different industries. I'm actually responsible within the pharma sector for the supply of process lines, process equipment, specifically for small molecules, or solids as we call them. So I'm afraid if you start talking about bio, you'll be leaving me behind. So we've been, I suppose, we consider ourselves to be one of the pioneers from the process equipment side into developing solutions for continuous manufacturing for tablets and capsules. We started developing our capabilities in that about 14 years ago. As I've been with Gaia for just over 20 years now, I've seen that develop. From our perspective, we think the process development is now robust, it's ready. We've successfully produced over 100 formulations using our technology, and we think that will now, it is being implemented in research and development installations and in production. So continuous manufacturing is here, and it's robust enough and will enable further implementation of digital solutions to get to further increase the actual business drivers behind it. Yes, those business drivers are many and varied, as Brian was intimating earlier, but they are very strong already, and digitalization will make them even stronger.
Thank you, Phil. Johannes?
Okay, thanks a lot, Greg. My name is JeanDenis Keenest. I'm a professor for pharmaceutical engineering at the Graz University of Technology. That's actually in Austria, in case you don't know. I'm also the scientific director of the Research Center for Pharmaceutical Engineering. And over the last 10 years, we've been very, very actively working in data-driven models, but mainly mechanistic models to understand a whole range of different problems, different aspects in the pharmaceutical life science. And I would kind of offer here a holistic approach, a holistic view, that we use a wide variety of different approaches for a wide variety of different problems in the pharmaceutical development, but also in the manufacturing of processes. So what we believe, the first bubble, or the first important building block are predictive models. We need to be able to predict. We need to be able to predict how materials behave. Materials are extremely complicated. We know we deal with hundreds of or thousands of different materials. I'm not only talking about powders, I'm also talking about biologics. I'm talking about RNA strands. I'm talking about the whole area of pharmaceutical compounds, which are materials. How do they behave? How can we predict the functionality? How can we predict how the structuring of drugs impacts their functionality? So all this is very important, and it's not really super well developed yet. So we started to develop science being able to predict the behavior of materials, the behavior of a drug, the functionality of a drug, the performance of a drug. And then, of course, and that's the second important part, connecting this with the production, with the manufacturing. So we also try to bring in digitalization, digital approaches in the manufacturing science. And see this as a whole holistic approach where there's still a lot of white pieces on the landscape, but we are starting to fill them, and not only us, other groups worldwide are starting to fill them. So I think in terms of science, we're actually much more advanced than we all here in the room believe. So I think there's an amazing level of science already available. We're just not ready to use it all. So this is our mission of my center in some ways, to bring all the science, channel the science, bring it to the companies, bring it to the equipment developers, work together with them to enable platforms and workflows. And what we believe here is platforms, workflows, it's about speed, being faster, being more effective, making better medicines. Developing platforms in continuous manufacturing is one of those, a very important one, but only one of those platforms that enables us to be faster, better, cheaper, more effective, benefiting patients. And the third bubble here, advanced quality control, which also fits in this whole paradigm. Advanced quality control requires understanding of the sensor data that you measure in your process. It needs to be connected with some mechanistic models that are able to delineate the physics of the process. Okay? And with the ultimate goal again, to ensure that the quality of what we're doing is the highest possible. And so I think digitalization, industry 4.0, whatever we want to call it, is already there. It's irreversible. But we as a pharmaceutical industry we are, that's my view, way too slow to adopt. And I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, but I think the main problem is training. Okay? So I think training. Pharmaceutical industry has been built by pharmaceutical scientists. Okay, these are great people, great scientists, and really amazed what they can do. But if you look at the curriculum of pharmaceutical scientists, you will see that there's very little modeling, very little math, very little digitalization. Still to this day. Okay, so I think this mindset is very slow to change. It's like a big ship on the sea. We're slowly adopting. We have too few engineers, or let's put it like this: we have too few people at the interface between pharmaceutical scientists and engineering. So this is another thing which we're trying to solve in Graz with this pharmaceutical engineering curriculum established. It's a master's program where we're trying to train pharmaceutical people at the interface: computer science, engineering, pharmaceutical scientists. I think if this happens in a widespread manner, we would be much faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannes. And finally, Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark Burst. I'm at the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency here in the UK as the competent authority. So, the competent authority for medicines, medical devices and blood products. I currently look after our devices team, so safety and surveillance for medical devices and software and apps as a team. Prior to that, so I've been doing that role about 2 months. Prior to that, I was head of our inspectorate at the agency, looking after GMP, GDP, pharmacovigilance, GCP and preclinical studies. Now the GMP team clearly have a big part in this space to do with manufacturers, and so some of the other bits I've popped down there really are around the work that we do on supporting innovation. So we have an innovation office. We do a lot of work on horizon scanning as to see where as regulators we fit with the whole process around innovative manufacturing. There's a whole piece that we do on international engagement, working with other stakeholders, other regulators internationally to try and smooth that harmonised approach. Particularly in this space, there's a lot of work we've done previously across the European network and with the US FDA in terms of going out to sites to see how they're implementing these processes, particularly with Q8 and Q9. And then there's a whole education piece as well, and how do we take forward better education of where the regulatory piece sits to support innovation and to support companies in understanding the best thing to do. Just as a thought really, and you're asking for controversial type of things. So so I've been at the agency about 16 years and started as a GMP inspector. When I very first started in industry, back in the early 90s, I was a process technologist and for a big pharma company. And we're talking about how long it takes there to do DOE, etc. I can remember spending 18 months doing relentlessly nothing but sorting out a granulation cycle for a line extension that we were working on. And to be honest, half the companies that submit things don't do it as well as I was doing, and that's 23 years ago. And probably half the dossiers that come into the agency have less thought process than that was then. So clearly there's a whole space to do, and this wasn't continuous, but I think that the education piece and the kind of maybe the emphasis and the oomph for companies to do more is lacking still. And I think big companies get it, but I think some of the small companies, probably the education piece, as you discussed, I think is a million miles away, some of the thought processes from some of the process technologists and companies that are out there.
Thank you, Mark. So a very good overview of the space and continuous manufacturing and the digital aspects. So I'm just going to throw a few gentle questions to get the panel warmed up, then open it up to the floor. So a nice easy one to start with, real-time release. That's really a myth, isn't it? Over to you, Johannes.
So the question was, is it a myth?
Yeah.
Well, maybe Mark, you might be the one who should answer this, but from my point of view, and don't get me wrong, I'm offering an academic point of view. We've been talking with a lot of companies about this in the context of continuous manufacturing. We believe that the science and the technology to enable real-time release is here. We have everything ready in terms of the sensors, in terms of the process understanding, in terms of the modeling that could enable real-time release. Of course, this is a process. Of course, this does not come at zero cost. You just cannot turn it on and turn it off. You need to have a robust inline monitoring, a robust inline control system. You have to have the right strategy. You need to have people who understand this whole framework. Also in connection with the CMC team. So you need a buy-in of the relevant quality people, of the qualified person for doing real-time release. But in our view, this is here. We also know that it's been done in some parts of industry already. I think you just have to demonstrate that at the end of the day, it's about making better quality medicines for people. So your real-time release strategy has to be very well correlated with the CQAs in terms of efficacy, in terms of compliance, in terms of safety of your drug product that you're making. But in our view, the pieces are here. It's just a matter of management in some ways to decide if they want it or not, okay? And if the benefit for the company is here. Okay.
Thanks, Johannes, for these opening remarks. Phil, from our equipment supplier,
Absolutely,
your thoughts?
absolutely, it's possible. You have customers that have achieved it, but it's not essential. You can still have a successful continuous manufacturing installation without having real-time release. It's just one of the many benefits that are there. You have to look at your own situation and decide, is the effort to actually get it to work worth it for us, worth it for you? I look at it sort of like the cherry on top of the cake. In this case, the cake is big. There are lots of business drivers, there are lots of benefits to continuous manufacturing. Real-time release is just one of them. And to be very specific, as a myth is a widely held belief that is not actually true, and usually involves supernatural beings or ghosts. I definitely don't think real-time release is a myth.
Thank you. Moving on now to another topic in terms of maybe a reason why continuous processes have not been introduced. So regulators are a scapegoat for the lack of pharma innovation. So I'll maybe pass that on to Mark just to comment from a regulatory perspective.
Sure. Well, I think you need somebody to blame, don't you? So that's fine. I was just sitting here reflecting, actually. I remember years ago I went to a sweet manufacturer in Colombia. So it was a bit like Willy Wonka. But they had a continuous sugar boiler, and they were making sweets in a continuous process. And actually the process I'd gone to look at, they kind of said, it's 3 o'clock. And they just, suddenly it became a pharmaceutical. And it ran till 6 o'clock, and then it went back to being a sweet again. So, and that was that's 13, 14 years ago. But I mean, clearly that sweet making process has been there for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, the factory was pretty old, so there was nothing new in that process at all to bring things about. But in terms of regulators stopping innovation, I think it's a topic that we've discussed lots at work, and particularly when all of the life sciences strategy came out, and we've struggled to find an example of where, and this is focusing on manufacturers and GMP, but where the regulations stop innovation or stop continuous manufacturing at all, and we've not found any examples of where the guidelines aren't wide enough to drive any of those processes through, really. So what we do have at the agency is we have an innovation office, and we've had a number of companies come in around continuous manufacturing processes to discuss those with us. Some of them have brought videos in of them building their plants, they've brought the data in, the technology, and that enables us to have sensible discussions around how they, even before they've designed their facility, but what are they planning on doing, gain some input from a regulatory point of view, so that either it helps with their design, or when we go to do an inspection, we've got some understanding around those processes. So, as I said, we've certainly not seen any processes there that have caused problems. As I say, internationally, in terms of the harmonization aspects, we were involved in all of the work for Q8. So, as a regulator, we put a lot of time and effort into those things with our licensing division. we've actively taken a leading role within the US EU harmonization and pilot work there as well to try and drive this forward as much as possible. So we haven't found any barriers. If people think there is a barrier to innovation, we would encourage you to come and talk to us about it. And if you find a point where you think the regulations or the GMPs aren't fit and are stifling innovation, which ultimately is going to lead to better patient safety and better compliance of products for patients, we would definitely encourage you to come and talk to us. I think the other thing that we as a view are starting to consider and the thing that we would like to see is how, and we almost had a bit of the discussion at the start, but all of the data that's available in a continuous process, how is that data used in a much more big data set to drive quality, investigate complaints? And at the moment, whilst things are manual, there's whole bits of data that actually could be quite critical to an investigation that are potentially being missed, and there may be root causes or issues leading to those root causes that nobody can envisage or see at the moment. But just bringing that data together and incidents of those things happening, I think there's a huge gain to be made there. I think in terms of productivity, but also in terms of just compliance and patient safety.
Thank you, Mark. Johannes, just a very quick
Yeah,
comment on this area.
I can only support what just has been said. I have rather seen it from the FDA side. It was a young assistant professor at Rutgers University, and FDA started to work with Rutgers to develop this PAD guidance actually, and they were already this time, this is like 15 years ago, very much eager to create new science, new flexibility, new technology companies can embrace. And we all know that the FDA has been pushing continuous manufacturing massively over the last years. So this is actually, I would almost say, in the US, a FDA-driven exercise, and not entirely, of course, but they've been drastically supported this. So I would think the regulatory field is very much supportive. Of course, we all notice there is a lack of harmonization around the globe. So I think that's certainly still a burden or a roadblock for some companies, but the major regions, FDA, Europe, Japan, China, we talked about this, Korea, they're all falling in place. Chinese agency just joined the ICH, as we've heard, so I think this is getting better and better and more supportive and more supportive. Can only think there's no scapegoat there. Needs to be blamed.
Maybe JP from a pharma perspective?
Yeah, so I think they have been used as a scapegoat, but I think we're kind of coming around from that now and realise that in many ways they're supportive. But I think, yeah, as Johannes mentioned, the major blocker in that regulatory piece is the lack of harmonisation, and the fact that, yeah, whilst you can have a quality conversation with FDA and with EMA and others, and progressively that's happening. That you're also going to have to register those products in other countries where you may well not be able to use the same argument. So you end up with a very mixed model, and that adds complexity in an already difficult space. I mean, the other thing is around the education and knowledge and insight associated with those groups. And it's important to recognise that regulators are going through the same change journey, potentially as the manufacturers themselves, and learning on the way, and that the inspectorate might be different to those that actually review. And so there are complexities within it. And I don't think it's simple to say it's all supportive and it's all nice. I think we're both on that journey together. I think ICHQ 13 may help, and I think there are areas within the existing guidelines that it isn't clear, and that may well sort of create blockers. And then if you step forward into sort of beyond continuous, and you start thinking, well, there are these massive data sets, and that potentially are they all synchronized in time? When you go into an investigation, what kind of things might you see? We are moving into a position where the amount of data and insight associated with manufacturing processes compared to what we typically have had with batch is going to be significantly greater. And I think in many ways, data is both the kind of wonderful thing, but it could also come back and bite us. We need to understand some of the challenges with that, and whether the regulators are with us or and supportive of that approach. So I do think that it's not a straightforward. You know, there is good regulatory support and there is no barrier. I think there are still things there that need to be worked through.
And one final question before I open it to the floor. We've talked a little bit about business case. So I really just want to challenge that. For continuous, the business case, it's not panacea. It's not universally positive. So maybe discuss thoughts on business case and also the digitalisation aspects from that. So again, start with yourself, John Paul.
I think there was a very good talk recently. I think presented through GSK, but it was the where you have a platform technology, you can probably make a business case much more readily. So that drives the difference between your API, where as Brian's talked about, every transformation may need something slightly different, and how is that being thought compared to a drug product where you may well just be trying to put everything onto a single platform or a large molecule. So I think there is, at that end of things, the business case can be potentially harder. I also thought the conference from Dave Tudor was really positive, is that we tend to have technical functions talking about what the sort of technology benefit is, and they may not even talk the same language as our manufacturing functions. So I guess now sitting between those two groups, I see a technical function trying to argue things from if you like, from a portfolio perspective and from the good science perspective, and a manufacturing organisation that's looking at OEE, at inventory, at lead times. And if you could actually bring those two conversations together, start to present business cases in that joined up way, that might help. But I think there's also a piece of, and so what, at the business level is, so we do all that, we save. What do we save? What is it that's actually going to be beneficial at a top, at highest levels within the pharma companies? And I think where you get to is that the business case is part of it, but actually it has to be this strategic shift. And for us, I think, as we kind of look forward, what you see is, and I guess behind my remark at the beginning saying continuous is essential, is we can manage as we are with the technologies that we've got. You wind the clock forward, we're going to have much faster development time expectations, so we're going to have to, clinical's no longer going to be the bottleneck. I think we're going to see a much broader and greater number of new medicines coming forward, so we're going to have to handle that without kind of increasing the development costs. And we're going to see a much greater demand for how we actually distribute these products across markets, and how we do that at the same time as the volume's coming down with personalised health. So you've basically got lots of things coming together to say, okay, if we manage as we do now, which is to make a load of stuff, put it in various parts of the world, hold on to lots of inventory, and we can manage that at a certain level of cost. If you take that into a new paradigm where we've got incredibly expensive medicines that we need to get to patients, it doesn't work. So somehow you've got to move to something that's much more demand driven, much more just in time, much more accelerated, and for me there's a technology problem in there, and if you can put that, technology solution in there, and if you can put that technology solution in as the only way we're going to be able to do business in the future, then the business case I think is much more substantive.
Maybe I'll open up to you, Brian, maybe also give a bio perspective.
In APC in January this year, we appointed a new Chief Operating Officer, Owen McMahon. It's known had spent 25 years in Eli Lilly, so it actually led to the introduction of the small volume continuous facility in Kinsale. And I think, without paraphrasing on too much, I think you would say that the business case is complex. And it's certainly not universal. I think there is very well established business cases for operations running continuously, primarily around chemistry and for safety reasons, and there's a lot of examples in the industry where there's a very clear business case for that. I think the business case for end-to-end continuous processing is far more complex. One of the interesting dilemmas, and John Paul has mentioned, that this attraction of platform capability. So for example, like kind of a platform flow hydrogenator or a platform continuous crystallizer is very attractive, but to some extent it kind of diminishes the benefits of continuous manufacturing in general, which is that you design bespoke equipment to fit the process that you have. But equally, I think that some of the work that Sean has mentioned, that a lot of the academic groups are doing, is allowing much better digitization and modeling of processes, certainly far in excess of anything that was traditionally done in the batch industry. So I think, if nothing else, this debate has led to much more innovation around modeling and design, optimization and digitization. And so I think maybe ultimately the solution may not be continuous, but I think it will be innovative. I think it will use better technologies and better innovations. At the first CMAC MIT Symposium on Continuous Manufacturing a number of years ago, Andrew Rutter made, which I thought was one of the best contributions, and he suggested that would it be possible in a parallel universe, if the pharmaceutical industry was operating continuously, that it would be having a symposium on the benefits of batch manufacturing. And I think there is a lot to be said for that. So I think some of this debate around digitization and continuous manufacturing is actually leading to more innovation than there's been before. I mean, we and others are looking at things like 3D printing and using advanced manufacturing to develop and to print reactors, for example, that are essentially disposable. And again, that provides opportunities that never existed before. Whether they're operated continuously or not maybe still be up for debate, but I think there's a whole lot of opportunities for a whole range of innovation. Groups like CMAC and SSPC and MIT and so on, Johannes's group are all working in this area. So I think that's where the real benefits may ultimately come from, and where the business case may lead to solutions that are not necessarily based around end-to-end continuous manufacturing, but I think will be based around a lot of innovation.
Yeah. Brian, maybe you could expand on your introductory comments about the case being easier in biomolecules in terms of
I think in biologics, certainly in their experience, there is a very clear challenge, and that is that there's simply not enough capacity. In the past, it was focused, I think, on upstream biologics, but I think both perfusion and improvements in cell engineering have maybe addressed that a little bit. But certainly in downstream processing, I think there's just not enough capacity worldwide. So they're looking at more intensive ways of operating those processes, and I think continuous is one opportunity there. But equally, I think biologics is an area where really the applications of modeling and digitization are way behind even where small molecules are. So I think the opportunities there to have greater optimization, greater process improvement, I think are very significant. But I think specifically it's because there is a very clear defined problem. It's not necessarily around safety or quality or even cost. It is literally around capacity. And I think from a research perspective, at least that driver becomes a very clear target to address. I think it's very helpful.
Okay, at this point, I'd like to open up to the audience. I've got some further questions here, but open up to the audience.
Thanks. Interesting discussion. It's Charles Gillam from GSK. I've got a question about, generally the industry is moving towards smaller volume products. I'd like to get the panel's view on how continuous technology and platforms will be able to support those smaller volume products coming through, particularly thinking about flexibility of the platform.
I'll take the first stab at that. I mean, I suppose the easy answer is to say that with a continuous product or continuous process, you inherently get agility and flexibility, because you want to make a small batch, you run it for a small amount of time. You want to make a larger quantity of product, you just run the same equipment for longer. So that agility of supply, your batch size becomes infinitely variable. So that's the first thing I would say to that. I think where we have room to improve even further is the change around time, to make it quicker to clean, easier to break down and move from one product to another product. That's where there's still room for improvement, but we're working.
Anyone else wants to come in on that?
Well, maybe, from my side, we all know classical pharmaceutical manufacturing process. You blend, you granulate, you add some external phase, you tablet, you coat. That's one way of doing this, and miniaturization of this and making it smaller and continuous is, of course, a very important advance. Okay? And we've seen that GEA, for example, is very successful in the market, implementing these processes in a continuous fashion. But I think, in parallel, there's also a lot of opportunity to think and use the continuous paradigm in a completely different way of making drugs. Not doing everything which we've done in batch, one-to-one, just translating it into continuous, but also having completely new approaches of how to make a drug. And I'm just saying melting, printing, hot melt extrusion, calendaring, 3D printing was already mentioned, and there are many other techniques which will allow us to be much more flexible. I think the reason why there's not, because we're doing a lot of this actually, but it's not like that the companies are coming and killing us because they want to do projects. I think the need, although we all see it and we also feel that there's a need coming, it's not reality at this point of time. So there's much less demand than I think the solutions at this point. That would be my honest answer.
If I can add, I think continuous manufacturing processes don't run at a steady state all the time because they have, you need to start them up, they need to get to a certain stable operation. So I think that, there must be some challenges as you go to smaller scales that, and smaller production volumes, that the startup time becomes relatively a very long part of the process. Mm-hmm. And the small volume products are probably very, very high value. So I think how we can control these processes, and the traditional way of starting it up and just saying we'll dial it into some operating conditions and wait for it to stabilize, is very inefficient. And I think we'll have to see a lot of improvements in the way we actually control these processes and start them up and get them to an on-spec product much more quickly than is currently the case.
I think
If I could add a couple of points there. I mean, one of the things we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is a drive for smaller equipment, slower equipment, basically less product in the process at any one time, which actually addresses a lot of the points that Sean just made. It does reduce that startup loss. Mm-hmm. It does reduce any loss if you go out of spec. I think the other thing that continuous manufacturing has done within the tablet production world, it's changed the priorities of which process you use. For decades, wet granulation has dominated our business in tablet production. That is changing. As we move towards continuous, direct compression will be king. Absolutely no doubt. Wet granulation will become a poor second or probably even third option. And that changes a lot because direct compression is a much simpler process. It's a much easier process to control. You can actually integrate it into one machine. You don't need a series of machines.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the flexibility bit is really important. It's more that the small volume demands create the opportunity, I think, for us to do things that are more beneficial. So when you start to think about that flexibility, be able to manage those fluctuations in demand in a much more responsive way, that's definitely a target, particularly from a regulatory perspective. If you're not regulated, you're approved on a batch size, you're approved on a different construct which allows you to flex things. So I think, again, continuous is that enabling element, but it's basically that the smaller volumes allow you to use those pieces of kit. The other thing I think is the similarity between laboratory and development equipment and commercial equipment, which then allows you to kind of get through that fairly that challenging launch phase with much greater with much greater responsiveness. So I think that's the other thing that hasn't been raised. I think is just that lining up between accelerating through development and launch phases as a consequence of using some similar technologies.
If I can just add one thing, I think as a community we need to make sure that we do have sort of fair comparisons, I think, between continuous and batch.
Yeah.
I think if we had put the same amount of effort into modelling and PAT and so on batch, we probably may find that the decisions would be a bit different. So I think I think everyone accepts that not everything is going to be continuous. Continuous and batch are two approaches within sourcing, and we need to make sure that we actually develop both and make sure that we are comparing the best batch and the best continuous. And I think at the moment, of course, there's an awful lot of development that's been going into continuous, but I think batch will remain. I mean, a lot of other industries still do batch, combinations of batch and continuous, and good reasons why that that still
I
exists.
certainly hope so. Still represents about 70% of our business. So.
So you're killing your own
Question down front.
No, I'll come to that.
Hi, David Molyneux from Alchemy. So we're an end-to-end CDMO. We do manufacture both API and drug product. So I've got two questions I'd be interested to get the panel's thoughts on. The first is we've been talking about continuous manufacturing for a few years now. So what is the real timeline that you guys think to widespread adoption of continuous manufacturing within the industry from today? And the second is, from an innovator perspective, to what extent is the expectation that a CDMO will have this capability in-house versus it being generated in the innovator's facility? Dave Tudor mentioned a bit earlier, you know, that they've looked to, it's part of the IP, so they've looked to provide both the process and the kit to do it. Is that a widespread view, or is that unique to GSK?
Very good question. Questions? Who's going to go first on that?
I get asked that question about every 2 or 3 months by my boss. Oh, you keep promising me all this business from the continuous manufacturing investments. When's it going to take off?
I'm on the payroll.
Yeah. The answer is nobody knows. You know, what we see, a lot of solid investment work, planning by big pharma, and a lot of other companies sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what happens. There's interest, but are they really prepared yet to put their hands in their pocket? No. My concern is that we will actually be hit with a tsunami when it goes. You know, there will come a time where demand far exceeds supply, and that will create issues of its own. It would be much nicer from a supplier's point of view to have more predictability. Some of the companies we're working with do share their plans, others are more secretive. So it's a very difficult thing to answer at the moment.
Yeah, only to reaffirm that, I think we were part of a survey that Accenture did earlier, through last year really, on the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Forum. And yeah, that basically showed that, I think, I can't remember the exact statistic, it was basically 90% thought continuous manufacturing would be a part of their business, but probably only 15% believed they were in a good place to start to move that forward, or something like that. So it basically says that is the direction of travel. The timeline against which it's going to happen, you know, it is less clear. What has happened probably over the last 6 years is you've gone from a lot of talk about it to now 4 approved, FDA approved drugs being manufactured through continuous methods, with more in the pipeline, and the first sort of API continuous process is about to be approved. So I think we really are probably at the very start of that, but I think you're right, what you're going to see is that becoming progressively much more established. You know, you do see some of those companies that have been working on in this area for some reason. I think it's something like 10 years seems to be the kind of normal time when they started out on this. That they're now in a position where some of this is starting. They describe it as business as usual, and I think, you know, they're the early adopters. They're getting to a business as usual. I think the kind of majority are now starting to pick it up and move forward in that space. So I think it's definitely coming. So that's the first question. I think only second question, potentially more difficult, and I guess very, very different business models with different companies, and the extent to which they have an externalized supply network. I mean, we do the majority of our core business in drug product is internal manufacture, and that would probably stay the same, and continuous effectively would be a technology we'd use in that space. API, we have predominantly externalized supply, and one of our challenges ongoing is how do we bring forward this technology in partnership with a CDMO network, you know, and I guess it would be highly desirable to see innovation happening through that CDMO network as well, but, you know, recognizing that there's a bit of, you know, it's not a case of build it and they will come, you know, you have to be taking risk in that. So we just need to come up with ways to find better ways to partner to get that innovation happening and moving forward within the CDMO network. Because again, I think even the API space where it is more challenging, I think it will happen.
More questions, please.
David Downey from APC. Question to Mark. Do we or can we incentivise people to take on innovation in terms of their submissions? So similar to the way MHRA and the FDA approach orphan drugs with accelerated approval status, could we do the same thing for continuous, or do we do the same thing for continuous?
And yeah, that's an interesting point. I know I don't think anything's ever really progressed with it, but I've had just kind of informal over a cup of coffee chats with FDA on exactly that type of point before, to say, how do you stimulate more people to come to you with applications that are involved in continuous manufacturing? And I think and probably where there is a bit of a regulatory blame, which maybe I didn't discuss in that first question about regulators to blame, is and there was the point made around inspectors and assessors being different, and I do think that there is a danger of when companies come with new technologies and lots of information, and rather than a point where there's an ability to say, so as a company you've got all of this data and you understand it, and you understand your processes better, and it's back to that parallel universe of, would you ever have a conference on switching back to batch manufacturing, where you wouldn't. But the danger is, rather than assessors being in a comfortable place to say, actually we can back off some of that assessment because the data's it's more in depth, they tend to look more in depth, and as a consequence it can slow things down. And I've seen examples of companies where they have come with a classical type dossier, but at the same time they've got a continuous manufacturing process. So once the approval's through, they'll then come with a continuous process afterwards to say, actually we've also got this, but what we didn't want to do was slow down access to market because we needed sales as quick as possible. So, and yeah, I'm sure I do think there are some discussions to be had, probably amongst regulators, because as much as possible you'd like to align the processes so that one approval means more and it carries some weight internationally. But I personally, I think there's some stuff that could be done in that space to say, how do you incentivise people to bring technology to you quicker? Now maybe it's you promise that you will, well you can't promise because the dossier may not be up to standard, but if it's okay, you reduce review times. So you're saying, you know, that there'll be accelerated review times on dossiers if they bring innovation because of the patient benefit at the end of it.
Any more questions from the floor? Right, I'll ask another one then. So we've talked quite a bit about continuous, maybe a little bit less about, you know, the digital aspects. So, you know, one of the themes of the conference has been, you know, patient, you know, benefits. So really just want to ask the question, is there actually a patient benefit of, you know, digital technology, you know, for manufacturing, probably in a more broad sense rather than just continuous? So maybe John Paul, pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think goes a bit to the comment we heard earlier, that I think we have to accelerate, and I think the digital component to this and potentially innovation is actually being able to accelerate some of our development timelines. So I think that's going to ensure that patients get the new medicines more quickly. It also, when we talk about some of the personalised therapies, yeah, I don't probably have the data to back this up, but we have to find ways to manufacture those medicines much more cost effectively than, you know, they're currently in a clinical setting. You know, these potentially cost significantly more than our medicines that are currently being marketed. And to simply say we will manage to manufacture them, I think is naive. So we do need to think about, they are going to come with different ways to manufacture. And I then think, you know, we talked a little bit about the sort of personalisation and, you know, smaller volumes and niche therapies. They're going to, if we're going to ensure that patients get those, and perhaps we can respond to sort of variable dose demands and various other things, then again we're looking at, can we control our processes much more effectively than we do now? Can we model different scenarios? Can we automate processes? Can we look at different distribution models? So I think it's you know, ultimately it's about making sure patients have access to the medicines. I think manufacturing is going to become a significant value driver in delivery of those new medicines, and the kind of digital and innovative manufacturing methods are going to be essential for the delivery of those medicines.
Yeah, it seems hard to believe that knowing more about your process, being able to describe it better, could in any way be a bad thing for the patient.
JeanDenis?
Yes, I think in a more general kind of view, we all know it takes an enormous amount of compounds to make a drug. We all know it takes 10, 12 years to make a drug. So it's not only the manufacturing, it's also the rational development of the drug. And if you think even maybe 10, 20 years ahead, having digitalized biopharmaceutics models which allow you to predict, design the molecule, the formulation such that the biopharmaceutics are matching your desired profile. And even doing in silico clinical studies. All this is of course something in the future, but I think science has to embrace this idea that we have to do this 30, 40 years from now in silico, in the computer. So I think yes, digitalization, computational approaches, mechanistic, paired with data-driven approaches is the future, absolutely. And we should be able to develop a drug maybe in 3 years instead of 12.
Sure.
Yes, I think the other opportunity we have with digitalization is our inferred measurements. So we can actually start looking at models that will monitor other quality attributes of these tablets as well. So from a safety perspective and performance perspective, you could think about real-time release actually focusing on many more characteristics of the drug product. So that would benefit.
I did just want to comment. I don't think there is, the medicines that are being marketed now, are safe applications for patients, right? So, the way we get there at the moment is through a huge amount of kind of end product testing. So, and a lot of waste is built in, is established in the system. So I think, also going to that point, I think if we can, the digitalisation journey and reducing the variability, increasing the control, effectively is going to reduce costs in other parts of our business, increasingly allow us to get this into market.
And perhaps the only way to get some of these new therapies to market. Any final questions? Well, I had my signal from the. Sorry, there's one from Jag Shry.
University of Cambridge and CMAC. A question around continuous manufacturing. If they shrink scale, so it's much smaller plants making smaller volumes, do you see these as lots of units in a few sites? Or do you see them distributed closer to end user markets?
Depends very much on the volume of the drug you're talking about. I'm not sure that we can give a one-size-fits-all answer to that. I mean, where are we at the moment in terms of scale? Currently, we're down at 0.5 kilo per hour. So, how many drugs do you know in tablet form where you're going to need to go slower than that? And really, it's not, we expected when we first developed the technology that people would be pushing us to go faster, higher volumes, higher throughputs. But actually, what we found is no, the key drivers at the moment are to reduce the amount of API that we use during the initial production. So we need to be able to run slower with less product in the system. So we're down at 0.5 kilo per hour now, so I don't think you'll need multiple units because you won't have that type of drug will not be required in a large volume.
I guess, I don't know enough about this, but it's a kind of market access thing. So the moment we currently will build a plant in a country to be able to put product into that country. So going beyond that into a benchtop piece of apparatus in every kind of hospital pharmacy or something, I think is that's an extreme end and probably will never happen. But being a response to some of our market access challenges, I think you could look at it that way. But each one of those is going to come with a level of overhead which would need to be understood and managed appropriately.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap up. I think it's been a fascinating hour. So hopefully now when you're asked about digital manufacturing or continuous, more people can put their put their hands up. Expert panel, we've just scratched the surface. I'm sure the guys will be around in the break. So I'd just like you to put your hands together, thank the panelists.